It appears more Nigerians are getting poorer. Well, the figures are not encouraging at all, especially considering the recent report has been released by the Nigerian Bureau, the National Bureau of Statistics, which says 133 million Nigerians are multidimensionally poor. In the latest National Multidimensional Poverty Index report launched yesterday, the NBS says that 63% of Nigerians who are poor due to a lack of access to health, education, living standards, employment, and security. The Multidimensional Poverty Index offers a multivariate form of poverty assessment, identifying deprivations across health, education, living standards, work, and shocks. The Statistician General of the Federation and CEO of the NBS, Mr. Semiu Adeniran, said that this is the first time the Bureau would conduct a standard multidimensional poverty survey in Nigeria. But what does this mean in the light of the federal government's plans to lift 100 million Nigerians out of poverty in 10 years? In 2021, President Buhari inaugurated the National Steering Committee of the National Poverty Reduction with Growth Strategy chaired by the Vice President, Yemi Osinbajo. The plan is to lift 100 million Nigerians out of poverty in 10 years with a well-researched framework for implementation and funding. But the question is, has this really worked at all? The World Bank had made its own projections on what could happen considering the poverty rate in Nigerians, and he projected that in 2022, poor Nigerians figures will hit 95.1 million people. But with the recent research and the report, it does look like things may have gotten even worse. Let's take a look at some of what these reporters said. I'll show you a few of the breakdown of what the report has shown us. It's shown us that out of the over 200 million Nigerians, 63%, that is 133 million Nigerians, are living in multidimensional poverty. 63% of Nigerians. Now, the report shows further that the figure of those who are living in poverty in the rural areas are 105.98 million people, with people living in urban areas who are poor multidimensionally are 16.97 million. There is a regional spread to that. It says in the north, there are 65%, which makes 86 million out of the 133 million people who are multidimensionally poor. In the south, 35%, which is 47 million people. Now, the highest and the lowest incidences by state shows that Sokoto State has 96% of incidents of multidimensionally poor people, while Ondo State has the lowest with 27%. Now, the top poorest states in 2022, according to that report, they include Sokoto leading the chart, Bayelsa followed, Gombe, Jigawa, and Plateau, those 5 states. But the least poor states, Ondo State leads the pack, followed by Lagos, Abia, Edo, and Anambra. Let's get a sense of what this means altogether. I'm getting an expert to break this down for us to understand what we are into and perhaps solutions. What can Nigerians do in the light of these very worrying figures? I have joining me from New York virtually the founder of Budgit, Mr. Seun Onigbinde. Thank you so much, Seun, for joining us tonight. Give us a sense of what this multidimensional poverty index report means. And when they say people are multidimensionally poor, break it down in layman's language. What does this mean?
All right, thank you so much, Seun. It's a pleasure to be here again. Let's not forget that we had a poverty index previously, which is called the monetary index. That already said around 95 million of Nigerians are poor. Now, this is a new report that says that it's not just monetary, because in the previous report, they was looking at the household income of people within an household, the average income in an household. But now this has gone deeper. So it's not just looking at household income. It's looking at it from the perspective of health. It's looking at the perspective of education. It's looking at living standards, and it's also looking at work and shocks. And I'll break that down a bit. And if we look deeply into the report, you see that the biggest chunk of when you say somebody is multidimensionally poor is what quality of healthcare should they have and nutrition. Let's start with that. A big chunk of this whole being poor is not about not just having money or the kind of income structure you have. If a child does not have the kind of feeding that he's supposed to have, or does not have access to even afford decent healthcare, then they were able to segment those kind of people as poor. Or education, school attendance. Do the children within the household, do they attend school? Are they able to progress to the next level of education if necessary? That is also a huge factor. Then you have work and shocks, which has to do with employment within the community. What kind of employment and income level does that person earn? And that also comes about. And if you have issues of food insecurity or security situation like what we have in the Northeast and the Northwest, banditry and the rest of things like that, what impact is it having on work? So if people are not able to work because of banditry and because of farms that have been seized, then what is the situation like that? And the third one is living standards, which has to do with what do they use to cooking fuel, energy use, and things like that. And I think we have to appreciate the people that have done this work, because it takes poverty just from looking at it from a very simplistic approach to now really drill down to say poverty in Nigeria is much more deeper than that. And we now have 133 million people that we say are poor. Then we have around 72 million of, in some sort of way. 72% of that, are in rural areas, another 47 million in poor areas, and even in the north, it's even more excavated in the north. The challenge in all of this is just to make us understand that whatever interventions, either social interventions or either ideas that we have been putting up in the past, they might be yielding some basic results. And I think a bit of point was made around, there was a report in 2018, even though that wasn't comprehensive, but it made sure that there was a little bit of progress. But if you have 133 million people below the poverty line in separate sectors, then definitely you know that you are not even making any form of change at all.
All right. The projections are not anything to write home about. I mean, it's getting one worried more and more. So the projection shows that by 2020, we've added about 3.8 million more poor people. And the projection also shows that by 2022, we would have added 5.1 million more people who are getting poorer. Now, you take this side by side with the plan, the holistic plan of government to say, the Buhari government has said, in 10 years, we're going to lift 100 million people out of poverty. Now, that should mean something, considering the welfare package of the government, the school feeding program, the trader money. Although the report, the Statistician General of the Federation said, COVID-19 is one of the factors that have been drawn into it. Give us a sense of what this means. If the projection is not reducing, is rather going up, what could have been the cause of this, the incremental progression of the more people, poor people we have in Nigeria?
Thanks so much, Joe. First thing we must understand is that as a country, we are growing. In fact, we're one of the fastest growing countries in the world. Average child per woman in Nigeria, and average when you put it around the country, is around 5.7, 5.8. So there is a reality in there. In fact, some states, like in Jigawa, in Kano, it could be as much as 8 children per woman. So we are a country that we are growing fast. And definitely, if you are not able to have a huge family planning in the tinkering around that environment, you are going to have significant issues with indices like this. Because the more you think you're trying to lift more people out of poverty, the poor, in quotes, technically have more children, and they just keep expanding this population as much as possible. So if there's any conversation that Nigeria has to have, an honest and holistic conversation, is to be around family planning. And I know there are even investments to put budget allocations to that 2023 budget. There's a bit of campaign from the civil society to make that happen. And another conversation that has to be on the table is also the education of the girl child. If women have the empowerment and the education to make their own choices about the number of children they want to have, then definitely you're able to understand that over time, quality of life is going to improve. The reality about reducing poverty, it's a 10-year idea is great, because even economists like China has proven that you can lift millions and that tens of millions of people out of poverty in just 2 decades. Now, but if Nigeria wants to do that differently, then it comes back to the basics. The basic is about people have to get work. There has to be productivity in the economy. If the economy is not growing and there's no productivity, if people cannot farm, if people cannot trade, if people cannot move around, if the infrastructure for all of that is being attacked, then definitely you cannot get people to get out of poverty. There are also bigger conversations around universal basic income. People should have a basic income, which is what you get with the social transfers and things like that. But things like that are not done from an holistic perspective, which is something I feel that when we have a report like this, we might change the direction. It looks like we have not built a coherent social contract theory in Nigeria and a proper identity system to really say, let's target the most vulnerable people in the country. That we have just carried the register and we are making adjustment. Let's have a proper social contract where we have a single citizen database and where we also can assess income levels and now say we'll take the lowest pile of the lowest and we're going to target them maybe on a universal basic income. And gradually we're also going to be able to look at rural economies and semi-urban economies, and how do we make them much more productive in the long term. Without us not fixing things like this, we are not going to be able to move things forward. The other thing, if you look at that report, is feeding. The school feeding program is a very important programming, but we understand that that's just a meal out of 3. So if a child does not get even proper feeding at home or does not have an opportunity to get feeding when he gets back home, the dynamics does not change significantly. It's also time for us to also look at how do we ensure that there's nourishment and access to quality feeding across that.
But Sean, I mean, just not to cut into your line of thought, but as those packages, as those plans worked, those welfare packages, considering the fact that we are adding more poor people, we're supposed to be taking 10 million people out of poverty every year for 10 years. But as all of those trader money, school feeding program, have they worked?
There are 2 problems here. One is I've not seen a coherent evaluation assessment of those plans. That's the first problem. And it's a bit shocking. Federal government, I mean, if you look at the 2023 budget, around 350 billion, which is almost the same size of capital investment in roads, is what we are investing in the social investment ministry. And that ministry, or the humanitarian ministry, that ministry did not even exist around 5-6 years ago. So my own big idea is that if you're pouring 350 billion in a program, or even up to 500 billion in some instances, by the time you put the recurrent side to it, what is the impact you are getting from that? We are not even assessing that program as we should assess that program. And it's just typical of Nigeria. Spend the money and spend the money. Nobody's giving rigor, to is the impact of the money. Is it happening as it should happen? The second thing you have is that is not the ticket out of poverty. Some of the social investment programming, without us not combining that with rising rate of unemployment or underemployment, most of those things are hard up. They would not work. The fundamental way of getting people out of poverty is to give them dignity by making sure that there's productivity in the economy and people have jobs. Without us not being able to tackle that from a basic standpoint, whatever we are doing are hard up and would not even change the matrix significantly.
So let's get it straight. The stark reality now is that we're supposed to take 10 million people out of poverty every year, but we are adding more. That is the stark reality, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a stark reality, and it will not. It's something that it will keep getting more people to be in poverty, and let's not even lie to ourselves. Whatever the government is spending on now is still not significantly enough. That's less than $1 billion annually or something around that. The stark reality is that the 100 million plan, without a significant economic growth leap. China, if we look at China, say China took people out of poverty. China was growing 8% plus consistently for over 15 years. So if you want to take people out of poverty, you first engineer growth. Engineer growth in a structured way that provides employment. If we can engineer growth, whatever funding we are doing to social protection and social investment schemes will never be enough. And I think it's a big lesson that the government has to get out of this. How do we invest in small SMEs? How do we strengthen rural economies? How do we strengthen semi-urban economies? How do we put pipelines, gas pipelines around everywhere so that we can reindustrialize this country? The port system, the road system, the rail system, if we have capacity.
But Sheon, does the government have any excuse? Tonight, if you are to put your finger on what the government is doing wrong in not getting it right, what would that be?
I would say a mix of things. And if you start first, is about you need to build a solid human capacity infrastructure. And I'll put that as human capital infrastructure, which is health and education. Those things have significant or outsized impact on tackling poverty. So if you have children being at home for 8 months, then you are not serious. If there's no national emergency on the situation of primary healthcare systems or primary education system, there you are not serious. You know, if you follow tracker on Budgit's project tracking tool, you will see every single day there's always a tweet of a school system that is broken, of an healthcare platform system that is broken. Now, if you don't fix those fundamental frames, you cannot even say you are trying to take out poverty, because education and health, they might sound like simplistic in the early stages and maybe the impact is not felt immediately, but over time, it compounds in how you're able to take people out of poverty. The next thing you need to do is jobs. How do you engineer jobs in an economy? And we know that agriculture is a huge stay as an economy. So an agriculture that is even productive is not subsistence agriculture. And how do you build agriculture at the scale? Close to 2/3 of the arable land in Nigeria is still not farmed. How do you get agriculture at that scale to engineer productivity and change the dynamics when it comes to...
And I would love to jump in again. And you will see government making reference to this figure that I'm about to quote now. And that is the India situation. In 10 years, India was reported to have taken 271 million people out of poverty. Now, we are going into an election year where different political parties have different plans. Nigerians want to know and want to be discerning. They are discerning to know who is lying to them, which political party has their interest. But I mean, educate us tonight, Sean, because you're an expert in this area and data is your friend. You crunch it with so much ease. How do we believe anyone who comes forward to say he wants to take people out of poverty? How do we discern that the person is serious? What kind of statement should we be expecting? Not just, I'm going to take so amount of people out of poverty, but anybody who wants to be the Nigeria's next president. How does the average Nigerian know that this person is serious about tackling poverty? What are you expecting that we should be hearing?
Okay, thank you so much. And the few things you should first hear is about how do I build a social contract framework first? How do I ensure that every single Nigeria is registered on the platform as a unique identity so that I'm able to properly determine who's poor, who is not poor, who has a kind of income level that we have to have. So any economic plan or any manifesto that you don't see a huge concern, a huge element of building a single user in citizen database, then definitely you know that whatever we are doing will always not be enough. The second thing is they are interrogating their plan on primary and health and primary education systems. Those elements have to be really, really well defined. And I know that this is at the federal level, but we all know how federal government has an overbearing element on most of these things. There has to be an integrated way of investing heavily on primary healthcare system, on primary education systems, and understanding that how do learning outcomes or health outcomes in that environment transform effectively. The third thing you have to see is the SME framework. Now, without us not being able to put funding or capital in the hands of small businesses or being able to strengthen entrepreneurship at any local or at even urban level, we cannot say we are trying to fight poverty. So if anybody doesn't have a significant target on SME development or SME investment. You can't say, oh, yes, we are going to tackle poverty. The last thing is on social protection. I'm always also of the belief that no matter how much we try to change all of these things, there will be a segment of the economy that's heavily vulnerable and that are susceptible to shocks.
All right.
For example, the flooding that we have recently is going to exacerbate the numbers because significant people lost their holdings and it's going to be difficult for them to come back. So how do you also invest in social protection?
John, we're out of time, but just in a few seconds, as your parting words tonight, if you look at the states with the highest incidence of multidimensional poverty, you see Sokoto, Bayelsa, Gombe, Jigawa, and Plateau. And if you see the state with the least, who are targeted as the people, state with the least poor people, Ondo leads the chart, Lagos, Abia, Edo, and Anambra. What is one characteristic that you have identified in the states that are not doing so well in this report that you think dramatically, if they watch, can change things around the states?
I'm always shocked with Bayelsa. And even if you look at Budgit State of States report, Bayelsa always takes a very, very disturbing position. And when you now look at poverty, this is a country, this is a state with less than 5 million people. This is a state. So when you now get, and with the humongous revenues that state received, there's a problem to say there's a string of poor leadership across. And this is not something that you say about now. That's compounded over time. I wouldn't say this result reflects the quality of leadership. That might be difficult to link that together. Because there are some states, like if you look at Abia, for example, Abia has an is a commercial nerve center of the East, with Harbour. So that plays it makes a huge play when you consider multidimensional poverty in some sort of way. And so some states have some inherent advantages over time. But what is also critical is that when you see a state like Yobe, especially Bayelsa, you begin to ask, what's the quality of leadership? Because we might look at the federal level to solve all this problem, but if we don't have, if the quality of governance at the subnational level is effective, we won't get results.
Bayelsa is the only southern state on that chart. The variation is that 65% of the spread is in the north, 35% is in the south. But Sean, thank you so much indeed. You should come back and let's talk about the campaign manifesto of the political parties and the policy agenda that they have. Let me know when you have the free time. We need to dissect all of those, isn't it, Sean? Thank you so much indeed for tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah.